Hey there, crewmates! We are back at it again to continue on the second to last portion of my Set 1 Romance Dawn set review, looking at the blue cards this time to round out the four that we've gotten in this set. So I'm going to just do a brief overview. I have been going over each of the other colors thus far. I am saving all of the dual color leaders for their own video. You can check that out. Probably going to come out the day after this one. But let's just not mince words and get right along into it with a very unexpected start with Arlong. I really didn't expect to see Arlong coming out of this set, especially with the very strong Wano theme that we have going on. But this is just great art to go with our favorite East Blue Fishman, so I'm glad they're at least doing him justice. So he is a uncommon character. His cost is 4, his attribute is Slash, his power is 5, his counter is 1, his types are Fishman, and he's also a part of the Arlong Pirates. His effect is Dawn 1, activate during the main phase. You can rest this character, choose one card from your opponent's hand, your opponent reveals it, and if it's an event, place one card from your opponent's life area at the bottom of the owner's deck. This is funny in a kind of cheese kind of way, but I don't think it's that good. If the ratios from the start deck wind up keeping true after the first set is revealed, we aren't going to be playing a lot of event cards. Maybe the blue deck does to be funny for a blue mirror match, but in most cases, the odds of getting one are a lot smaller, and depending on the deck you're playing against where they can have a massive hand size, it's very unlikely that it'll happen. And this is a very minor thing, but the fact that it targets events as opposed to non-characters makes it a little bit worse. Like, if it could also hit a stage, even though we only have Onigashima and the Thousand Sunny, I think it might be a bit better. But beyond that, its effect is mostly just not that great, and you're really kind of running it for its stat line, which isn't terrible, but I don't think this will make it. Next is Alvida, and I got a little spoiled on this one in some testing for one of the Kaido decks. So her cost is 2, attribute Strike, power 3, counter 2, and she is a buggy pirate. Her effect is Dawn 1. When attacking, you can trash one card from your hand to return one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 3 or less to the owner's hand. We've seen this a lot with the blue deck with returning stuff to the hand, and I think this is pretty decent. Blue is the color I'm the least familiar with, so I don't know if this will see play, but having decent stats for a bounce effect is always something that we're going to like, especially because you can target something of 3 cost just to make your opponent pay a decent amount of their Dawn in a future turn. Next is Vergo, who is our standard vanilla, so cost 5, power 7, counter 1, Navy, Donquixote Pirate, and a part of Punk Hazard with no effect, what we've come to expect from vanillas. Next is Krieg, another vanilla, and glad that we're just getting the East Blue shout out here apparently. So with cost 4, slash attribute, power 6, counter 1, Krieg Pirates, no effect, basic vanilla stat line. Then we have our first SR being Sir Crocodile himself, whose cost is 7, his attribute is special, power 7, counter 1, 7 Warlord of the Sea, and a part of Baroque Works. So his effect is banish, so whenever it deals damage, it is trashed without triggering, and Dawn 1, all of your blue events have their cost reduced by 1. That is very, very good. The blue deck I know does enjoy its events and being able to reduce them all by 1, and it doesn't say there's a minimum, so if you're running a 1 Dawn counter event to protect yourself on your turn, it's basically free while Crocodile's here, and has the banish effect on top of this. This is a great card. There's really not a whole lot more to say about it. Next is Gecko Moria. I really like the art with the purple color scheme going on. His effect is he's cost 4, attribute special, power 5, counter 1. His type is of the 7 Warlords of the Sea and the thriller Bark Pirates. During your turn, it gets double attack if you have 5 or less in your hand. I think that's decent. I don't know how much card draw blue has, but being able to just get double attack is always good, especially on a decently statted character. So being able to just knock out 2 life if you're able to pump him up seems pretty solid. Next is Caesar Clown, whose cost is 4, attribute is special, power 5, counter 1. He's a scientist and part of Punk Hazard, whose effect is on KO, put a Smiley from your deck, play 1 Smiley from your deck, then shuffle. That's neat. I, again, have not read any of these blue cards before, like in any of my other videos, so it really depends on what Smiley does. I hope this winds up being a little bit more interesting than what we saw with Kurazumi, Orochi, and Smiley in the purple side of things, but this is a really neat effect. But if you watched my previous videos, I'm not yet sold on KO effects, because while it's decently statted, it really is as simple as don't attack him. But we'll see what Smiley looks like when we get later down in the video. Ooh, I have not seen this before. This is gorgeous art for the SR Mihawk. Even if I don't play blue, I kind of just want to have this. His cost is 9, attribute is slash, power 9, and he's a 7 warlord of the sea and a swordsman, whose effect is on play, place one character with a cost of 7 or less on the bottom of their owner's deck. That's quite solid. It works a little bit better than removal, because as we've seen in red, there are some ways of getting cards from the trash back to the hand. So just being able to send away anything, and of a cost of 7 or less, I don't know how big stuff like that is going to be, but it hits the queen blocker for purple, it hits Kinemon for green. This is high costed, but this seems pretty decent, and that art alone sells it for me. Next is Jinbe, more great art. Cost is 4, strike is 2. His power is 2, which is odd for cost 4, so let's just see what he does. Type is Fishman, and he's a part of the Straw Hats, whose effect is on play. Place a character with a cost of 3 or less at the bottom of the owner's deck, and trigger is play this card. That's neat. Its trigger can act as battle phase disruption, just to get rid of a possibly problematic character. I think it's as costed as it is because of the trigger. I think his power is unfortunately not that great, and only being able to hit cost or 3 or lower, I don't know how amazing this is. I like the disruption that blue is getting that isn't outright knockout, but I think I'm going to need to see a bit more if this will see play. I am not sold on Jinbe for blue. Next is, well, here's Smiley. That was fast. Whose cost is 3, special attribute, power 1, counter 1, who's a biological weapon and part of Punk Hazard. His effect is Dawn 1. You can, during your turn, it gets 1,000 for every card in your hand. That's possibly good. The fact that it has Dawn 1 means it's an effective 2,000, and it's pretty easy to pump it up. It just kind of depends on how many draw effects blue is able to have access to, or at the very least being able to search and add things to hand. But the fact that it's 3 cost for a 1 power based, in spite of that hand effect, doesn't seem that great, even if it's searchable off of Caesar. But I could be wrong. Hopefully we get some more cards that provide card draw. Next is Donquixote Doflamingo. I do not like this art. It just does not look weird to me. Why does his neck go so far back? His cost is 3, his attribute is special, his power is 4, his counter is 1, his type is 7 Warlord of the Sea and the Donquixote Pirates, who is a blocker, and on play you could check the top 5 and put them at the top or bottom of their deck in any order. Blue has a couple of these, and I am hesitant to say how good something like that is. One of my issues is you have to put them all in the same place. Granted, if you could put the 3 best ones on top and the 2 worst on the bottom as an example, it might be too good. So if you have 1 good card and 4 bad, you're probably going to put them on the bottom, or 3 good, 2 bad in the top in that same order. But it definitely depends on how much card draw or filtering the deck does, because I know the start deck Mihawk can filter. So stuff like this does have some potential. He is a blocker, but at 4 power for 3 cost, those stats on a blocker aren't incredible, so we have to see where it goes. Next is Kuma. So notable because he is not a Pacifista, because I know Sentomaru has Pacifista related effects. His cost is 4, his attribute is strike, his power is 5, his counter is 1, type is 7 Warlord of the Sea and a part of the Revolutionary Army, who is another blocker who on KO you can play a Pacifista with cost 4 or less from your hand. I really like this. I know I've said that I'm not sold on blockers, but the fact that, on KO effects, but the fact that it's on KO on a blocker makes it very good. It really depends on how many Pacifistas you can run that will make this good, but the fact that it's a decently studded blocker that could get you a free card from your hand on board does seem like it's pretty useful, and if you want to play a Pacifista deck, this is an auto inclusion. I really like this card. And speaking of, we have the Pacifista. Cost is 4, so you're gonna want to cheat this out off of the previous Bartholomew Kuma. His attribute is special, power 5, type biological weapon, and a part of the Navy. The effect is you can have as many card in this deck as you may have as many of this card in your deck as the rule permits. I think that is another typo. If you've seen some of my other videos, there have been a few typos. I think what this is supposed to say is there is no limit to how many of this card as you can. And it's also a blocker, which means if you can run as many of this card as you want, and you run this with the other Kuma, being able to turn one 5,000 power blocker into another one makes for a very cool synergy. I the Pacifista deck is actually pretty funny. I'm kind of interested in this as at least like a budget build. This could be just kind of interesting. Next, we have Bellamy, who's a vanilla, so 2 cost power, 4 attribute strike, counter 1, Dressrosa type, vanilla. Next is Perona, an uncommon, cost 1, attribute special, power 2, counter 1, thriller bark pirate type. On play, check the top 5, put them at the top or bottom in any order. I don't think this is worth it. I think you're really just better off running Doflamingo for the blocker, even if it costs extra. I'm really not that in love with the putting stuff at the top or bottom yet. So I think for now we can kind of skip stuff like Perona. Next is Boa Hancock. Wow, they really tried to put the anime into this artwork. Cost 4, attribute special, power 5, counter 1, type 7 ward of the sea and Kuja pirates, whose effect is she is a blocker, and don 1 on attack or on block. That's interesting. Draw 1 if you have 5 or less in your hand. I really like this. It's a blocker with an on block effect and an on attack effect if you're thinking that you don't need to or want to block on your opponent's upcoming turn. This is really interesting, and it's decently statted for both being a blocker and having a not that huge conditional draw. I really like this. And next is the rare Mizal Sunday, whose cost is 3, strike attribute, power 1, counter 1, Baroque work type, and the effect is she is a blocker with another on KO effect, where if your type is Baroque leader, add an event from your trash to your hand. Love it. Absolutely love it. I know blue is all about events, and there are the Baroque work leaders. This is amazing. It's a solid on KO with a blocker attached. Blue is really giving what blocker, or rather on KO effects need, which is attaching them to blockers or characters that actually want to die. Next is Miss Doublefinger, and they actually put in her canon name, which I think is interesting. Cost 3, attribute slash power 4, counter 1, on KO, draw a card. You'd run it if Baroque work is going to seem like it's full deck. It's an on KO that you can just avoid attacking, so not wowed, but it's a Baroque work type, so if they get a searcher or you want Baroque work cards, it fits the theme. Next is Mocha. Really odd choice making a child a card, but whatever. Cost 3, attribute strike, power 5, counter 1, punk hazard type, the vanilla we've expecting. Monet, I like the color palette that they used for this art. Cost 2, attribute special, power 3, counter 1, punk hazard and Donquixote pirate type. No effect but trigger, you can play it. It's kind of the vanilla with trigger attachment, which, as if you've seen my other videos, you know I'm not wowed by. So moving on to Mr. 1, Daw's Bones, an uncommon. Cost 2, attribute slash, power 3, counter 1, type Baroque work. Don 1, during your turn, if your leader is Baroque Works, it gets 1,000 for every 2 events in your trash. That's interesting. So if you have 2 events in your trash, it becomes a 5 because of its effect and the Don 1 requirement. And I feel like that's not that hard to put up in a blue focused deck, especially with Baroque Works. So I can see this being quite solid. I'm a fan of this. I think Daw's Bones is pretty neat. Next is the uncommon Mr. 2 Bon Clay Bentham, love of my life, whose cost is 3, attribute striker, power 4, counter 2, type Baroque Works, whose effect is Don 1, when attacking, check the top 5 for a Baroque Work event and add it to your hand. Put the bottom in your deck in any order. Love it. Absolutely love it. Something like this is part of why I would start considering the check top 5 for whatever, keep on top or bottom, because if you check the top 5 and you don't have an event, send them back, use Bon Clay, and you'll probably find one in the next 5. So I really like this, and 1 Dawn makes it 5 so it can hit leaders. So for the price of activating its effect, you can hit a leader and potentially get a basically free +1. I love this card. But Baroque Works is seeming like a pretty solid deck, if I'm being honest, so far. Next is another Baroque Work card for Mr. 3 Galdino. Cost 2, attribute special, power 3, counter 1, color blue, type Baroque Works on play. If your leader is a Baroque Work, select one of your opponent's characters with a cost 4 or less. The selected character cannot attack until the end of your opponent's next turn. That's really something, and it seems very solid against the Zoro leader because that's a pretty decently early mid-game deck, so being able to hit a character that, and make it so they can't attack in the attack-oriented deck, that's very interesting, and it's a part of Baroque Works, so you have a decent meta pick in this deck already that you're probably going to want to include regardless. So I really like this card. Next, we are finally onto the event cards. This is Overheat. So its cost is 2, type is 7 Warlord of the Sea and Donquixote Pirates. Its effect is counter, one of your leader gets 4,000, and you can return one active character with a cost of 3 or less to the opponent's hand. Trigger, return one card with a cost of 4 or less to the owner's hand. I love this. It's 4,000 power for 2 Dawn, which is a pretty fair trade, but also you can return a 3-cost card to the opponent's hand, so it works very well defensively because you can effectively stop 2 attacks with this. And its trigger is really good because you can hit an even bigger card for free if you're not getting the 4,000 power from triggering it. And a very thing that's interesting to note about the trigger is it just says return 1 card unless that's a mistranslation, as we've seen. If it does say that, if you really want to, you could return a stage. I don't know if that's worth it at any point in the game right now. We would need to see probably better stages down the line, but that trigger might actually come up, so this is a very solid event. Next is the Officer Agents, more Baroque Works support. They're really going all out with Baroque Works. Cost 2, type Baroque Works, so this is searchable off of Bon Clay. Counter, play a Baroque Work type with cost of 3 or less from your hand, and trigger, you can activate this counter effect. That's very neat. I actually quite like that. Yes, it doesn't provide a defense, but if you were planning on taking a hit anyways, you could just play a card that you either couldn't play because you only had 2 Dawn as opposed to 3, or you could keep the Dawn up and make your opponent think you have something like Overheat, and then on their last attack just cheat out a 3 or less. And it also has a good accompanying trigger just to do it to set you up for the next turn. And actually, I just realized you can play this with Galdino. So you could play Galdino with this when your opponent attacks and freeze a card. And actually, let me check Galdino's effect. It's that card can't attack until the end of your opponent's next turn. So if you freeze a card with Galdino using Officer Agents, that specific card can't attack for 2. Actually, well, somebody please comment below if you figured it out, because it specifies until the end of your opponent's next turn, not until your opponent's next end phase. So based on this translation, I think it means if you play Galdino off of Officer Agents, that card would be stunned for 2 turns. If that's the case, that is very solid. And even if it's not, you can still just freeze a card during the turn, which isn't bad. So this is another solid card. I'm actually getting quite into Baroque Works. This is very cool. So next is the uncommon Desert Spada, more Baroque Works support. Cost 1, 7 Warlord of the Sea Baroque Works, still searchable off of Bentham Bon Clay. Counter, your leader or one of your characters gets 2,000 power, then check the top 3 and put them at the top or the bottom in any order. And a trigger, draw 2, trash 1. This is very good. It has the 2,000 that we expect from a regular 1-cost card. That's kind of a fair trade normally, and you could predict your future turn. And it also has an accompanying trigger that just lets you go +1. This is very good, and it's searchable off of Bon Clay. I am loving the Baroque Works deck. I kind of want to check this deck out. This seems so cool. And more Baroque Works events. Fantastic. They're really giving all the love to Bon Clay. Cost 3, 7 Warlord of the Sea Baroque Works. Counter, if your leader is a 7 Warlord of the Sea, so it isn't necessarily restricted to Baroque Works or Crocodile, you can return a character with the cost of 5 or less to the hand. That seems pretty decent, and you'd probably run it even in a non-Crocodile leader deck that is a 7 Warlord of the Sea, just because for paying 3, you can protect yourself from a cost 5. So I quite like this, and it doesn't need to be rested or anything like that. So you can use this proactively during a turn where your opponent has an upcoming 5-cost attacker, just to make sure that they don't get to attack with that. This is quite solid. Next is, Jesus, they're giving Baroque Works everything. They might as well have just made this the start deck. So it's an uncommon event, aptly titled Baroque Works. Cost 1, Baroque Works type. Effect during the main phase. Look at the top 5 cards. Reel a Baroque Works type card other than itself and add it to your hand. Put the rest on the bottom in any order. This searches everything. This is crazy. You can have Bon Clay search this, have this potentially search Bon Clay, and that Bon Clay, granted, will have summoning sickness, but then you could turn that into a potential 2 searches next turn. This is so good. And if you're playing the SR Crocodile, this is free. The Baroque Works deck is wild. This is so cool. And lastly, we have the last monocolor leader. Again, I'm going to be skipping over the dual color leaders. So we have Donquixote Doflamingo as a leader, which I'm glad they gave him the respect he deserved. He's the average monocolor leader, so life 5, attribute special, power 5. Type is 7 Ward of the Sea and Don Quixote Pirate, so this is workable with, I believe it was Crescent Cutlass, yeah, so because it's a 7 Ward of the Sea, whose effect is Dawn 2. When it's attacking, you can pay 1 Dawn to reveal 1 card from the top of your deck. If it's a 7 Ward of the Sea with cost 4 or less, you can play it instead rested. Now I understand why we have the top deck sculpting. If you played like Perona or the Doflamingo card, you could just sculpt it so you know this card would proc. It has Dawn 2, so you'll be using it when it can hit for 7k, which is a decent number. This is a solid leader. I quite like it. I don't know if the 7 Warlord of the Sea as a pure deck is good enough as is to make this card super viable, but because it's 7 Warlords of the Sea, they're gonna be getting more cards in the future. They just have to. So I think this is not a great leader right now, but it definitely has some potential down the line, which is interesting to see. So thank you all for watching. That wraps up the list of the blue cards. I'm actually surprised by how interested I am in the blue stuff, mostly because of Baroque Works. I was looking at the start deck, and it was the one I was probably the least sold on, maybe just more than the red one. I didn't care for the Luffy start deck, but the Baroque Works stuff is kind of wowing me. I'm quite interested in how that deck goes and what it winds up looking like. But that about wraps up for the video. Let me know if there's anything in blue you're interested in. Let me know if there's anything you thought I got wrong looking at these cards. And let me know what you're most excited about for the set. Thank you again, and I'll see you in the next video.